Okay, let me get rid of the, Robert, can you get rid of that?
Sure, I'll go.
Got it.
Got it. There you go. Yeah, I'm learning. I'm learning.
Seeing as it's 7:01, I'd like to call the council meeting for October the 27th to order. Could I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make the motion.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Hay, second.
Are there any late items? Seeing as there's not, I will call the vote to adopt the agenda as presented. All in favor?
Excuse me, your worship. Sorry,
Yes.
your worship. I understood from acting CAO Matuzzi that you were wanting to potentially move the public comment section below section 12 new business so that it would come after the report for the short-term house needs report.
Yes, we will do that.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. So we just need to do that as part of adopting the agenda. That would be it is a slight amendment to the agenda. So I'll just note that that's been changed
Thank you.
and you can adopt as amended. Thank you.
Okay. So can we adopt the agenda as amended? Yes. So like we made the vote, okay? So all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So delegations, we don't have any delegations. Adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting for October the 13th. That's public comment has been moved to 12 now.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Is this the one that we have to amend now?
Actually, I think I misread it. I apologize for misleading.
So are there any amendments to Wednesday, October 15th minutes? Seeing as there's none, can I get a motion to adopt the minutes for the regular council meeting of October the 13th as presented?
Councilor Hay makes the motion. And Councilor Hay seconds.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Business, we don't have any business arising, so we will move on to 6.2. Our acting chief administrative officer is Ron Matuzzi, and according to the community charter section 147 and 148, we need to get a motion to appoint Mr. Matuzzi as the chief administrative officer and the acting corporate officer for the village of Litton.
Councilor Hay, I'll make the motion that according to Community Charter Section 147 and Section 148, council appoints Mr. Ron Matuzzi as the acting chief administrative officer and acting corporate officer for the village of Litton. And I will second that.
Is there any discussion?
Do we have a timeline on how long this is in place for?
Not at the moment.
And is Lori no longer our corporate officer then?
Yes, she is.
Yes,
I
she
was
is, or she isn't?
Sorry, I was never formally appointed. I'm acting basically as the deputy clerk at this point in time. So the corporate officer appointment was for Ron to be able to perform the functions of the CAO.
All right then.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The acting financial officer, I'd like to introduce Terry Hawes. He's sitting right there. Could I get a motion that we appoint Terry Hawes as our Chief Financial Officer for the Village of Litton.
Counselor Hay, I'll make the motion that as for the community charter section 149, council appoints Terry Howes, MNP, as a contracted chief financial officer for the village of Lytton.
And I will second that.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify, because I had Terry as MNP. I believe that his company is actually TW Hawes Professional Corporation as the contracted financial officer. Sorry about that. I didn't have that information when I was writing the agenda.
Counselor Hay, I'll make that friendly amendment.
Thank you.
And is Mr. Hawes contracted with MNP? Is that how he's come to us?
Your worship, maybe I can answer that. Yes and no. He was contracted in MP, but he's now working on the recovery through the village, but on the recovery. So it was, there was two ways to do it. He could either stay with MNP or he could come directly. And if he came directly, there would not be any of the overhead charges that MNP would normally pay.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
All right.
Rental subsidies for displaced residents. We have a motion.
This comes from, I think, the old. Not sure where this is coming from.
Okay,
I believe this was put forward by Councillor Gray at the last meeting, and it was deferred, a decision on it was deferred to this meeting. So I'm not certain if Councillor Gray is going to make the motion again.
Are we going to talk about it or are we just going to defer it again?
well, we can talk about it, but you first have to make the motion.
I want to motion that staff be directed to implement as quickly as possible an option for displaced residents to remain in their current rental units until their own home in Lytton is rebuilt by providing rental subsidies and a management firm to source potential rental units for other displaced residents and pay the subsidies to the appropriate landlords.
Do we have a seconder? Well, I'll second the motion, just to open it up for discussion. When you're talking about a management firm for the renters, what exactly does that entail? And what is that going to potentially cost?
That was the point of getting this done so that we could find that out. That's why I wanted to do it weeks ago so that we could get the information and see about getting people some subsidies. And a firm who can manage it, who will manage the payments to the landlord, who will help people find rental spots if they want one.
Yes.
Thank you, Worship. Councillor Gray, part of the recovery plan looks at how, in fact, homeowners could be subsidized or helped through this. There is a level of subsidy, which in the subsequent plan we'll talk about, that the provincial government has come forward with. What we haven't added at this point in time, but as part of the housing needs, that may be something that could be looked at, is the whole property management side of it. If that's council's wish, we could certainly look at it as part of the recovery and see if in fact there's any ability for provincial subsidy. I don't believe at this point in time it would be within the village's budget. So obviously the best course of action is to put it as an ask as part of the recovery plan.
Councillor Hay.
Councillor Hay, I deal with this in Alberta, and it's almost a 60-40 thing. And the reason I get concerned with this is people coming off of ESS with their accommodations being 100% paid for, all of a sudden having to pay 25, 35, 45% or more of the rental when they have been used to be getting ESS. Not sure everybody's going to be able to afford that. That's just a statement.
Do you have any further questions? Or would you like to discuss this any further?
It doesn't seem that there's much to discuss. My point originally was that we were looking at covering the entire amount of a rental.
And
Does
I
no
guess-
one remember this discussion? We had this discussion at the interim housing committee meeting.
I certainly don't.
Dear God.
All in favor? Those opposed? Now moving on to the Mandel Engineering. The motion was defeated. The Mandel Engineering Village Office Suitability Report. It's included in your package. Is Mr. Mandel here? I don't think so. No. So, would someone like to make a motion regarding the engineering, Mandel Engineering ability report for the office?
Councillor Hay, I'll make a motion, Mandel Engineering for the village office site suitability report be adopted for information.
I'll second that.
Discussion. Is there any discussion on this report?
Sorry. Point of order. Not adopted, but received. Lori, can you change that word, please?
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Been received. All in favor of receiving the report? Those opposed? Okay, we'll move on to E, Mandel Engineering Interim Housing Site Suitability Report. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion to receive the information.
I'll second that. Yeah, second the receiving of the report.
Point of order if I can. Lori, do you need the title for the motion?
I'll include that for you. Thank you. And was that Mayor Polderman who seconded?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All in favor of receiving the report?
Aye.
So we're on. Thank you. Staff reports. Chief Administrative Officer.
Give you an update?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure where to begin. I think a lot of the time this week has been trying to assemble a recovery team, and I have to report Mr. Hawes is on board now, and he's already been quite busy putting together the financial information and getting bills paid, which has been I think a major accomplishment, and so some of those things are going to happen today, which is nice. We've also recruited a recovery manager, and that's just really the first phase, because it'll be a recovery management team to come in and start to pull together the team that we need. And this individual is very familiar with the Fraser Canyon Valley communities and a lot of the First Nations. And one of his goal is to, in fact, as the team is built, to use as much local talent to supplement the technical people that are needed on the committee. So you have a nice blend of technical knowledge as well as local knowledge to help guide the next phases of the recovery. A lot of my time is really, trying to deal with some of the immediate areas around debris removal and bringing on a chief building official to help guide the demolition permitting process. We certainly don't want to hold up anyone any more than we have to by not having some of the local permitting in place. And whatever time I had left, I was working on the plan we'll be presenting tonight, and we'll speak a little more to it later, but certainly took this week pulling all pieces together so we could do this plan. And of course, this plan is an integral first step to begin and free up some of the funding that we can then use as the recovery starts to progress.
Thank you. So we're on to 7.2, and it's the 2020 audited financial statements for adoption. Oh, 7.1, we had a report from Urban Systems regarding our water quality. Could I get a motion to receive the report as presented?
I'll make the motion to receive the report.
Second.
Counselor Hay, second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? The report is received.
Aye.
Now we'll move on to the 2020 audited financial statements. Mr. Haas.
Thank you, Your Worship. So at the last meeting, the financial statements were presented, and I think there was some discussion from council regarding the financial statements and the wish to take them away and study them and come back with appropriate questions and queries. So I think maybe the first thing we can do is take those questions.
My question is at the end of the 2020 year, we ran somewhat in that you had a surplus at the end of the year. Is that correct?
We had a surplus of $139,000 at the end of 2020.
Does anyone have any questions?
I have one question. What does it mean 12D? It says the village is committed to the lease of its office space and makes monthly payments of $1,085 to the TNRD. The current term will be in effect until April 30th, 2021.
Which note? Pardon me?
12A.
12A.
Does that mean that we're not paying lease anymore? You may not know that, though.
No, so, Councillor Leach, this is a note in the financial statements, which is a requirement. And so this talks about commitments and contingencies. So we have an obligation to advise readers of the financial statements of commitments out 5 years and thereafter, right? So any lease agreements, so it could be for equipment, premises, computer systems, what have you, we have to provide a schedule and appropriate notes to what the commitments of the village are. So it's not to, I forget what your other part of the question was, but we didn't have a lease or something.
Well, there was some discussion over a lease that was made between the village and TNRD, but nobody kind of knows the details of it.
Right, and I'm sure that's gonna be part of our data rebuild. And so we're gonna have to go to TNRD and ask for a copy of their copy of the fully executed lease. And we'll be obviously saving and documenting that for reference. But
Okay.
as of today, I'm not aware that we have that yet.
Would someone like to?
Sorry, I have a question.
Go ahead. Absolutely.
Councillor Hay, on page 14. if I could. Under reserve funds, it's at the total we have from reserves right now is 1.177786. That's what we have in reserves right now.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Hayes. So you have to remember financial statements are a history book.
Okay,
So this is December 31st, 2020. We're now almost end of October.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the current
no,
number
I
is.
don't need, that's what we closed.
As of
off.
December 31st, that is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. No trick question.
No, I just want to be clear in my answer.
Thank you very much.
Are there any further questions? Hearing none, could I get a motion to adopt the financial statements? 2020.
I'll make the motion to adopt the 2020 audited financial statements.
Councillor Hay, second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, reports from the mayor. We don't have any listing of incoming correspondence.
Excuse me, your
Oh,
worship.
sorry. Okay, yes. We missed- Okay, sorry about
Sorry,
that.
there's a very important agenda item next, which is our signing authorities. Thank you.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I didn't have a written report. I've worked with Lori to develop a resolution to enable us to have the authority to appoint the CEO as a signing authority and as well as signing authorities relative to our banking needs and requirements. As you know, we need those to pay our bills and transact the business of the village. So Lori, is that something that you're going to share your screen with, or are you just going to read it out?
I'll just read it out if that's okay. So the
Thank you.
motion is that the following individuals be appointed as signing authorities for the Village of Litton's accounts at the Scotiabank effective October 27, 2021. One of designated employees, Ron Matuzzi, Acting Chief Administrative Officer, Terry Hawes, Acting Chief Financial Officer, and one of council members, Mayor J. Polderman, councillors R. Leach, L. Gray, or I. Hay.
Are we doing a separate motion, Lori, for the ones that we're deleting?
Yes, we are. So I've actually got 3 different motions that we're going to be making here. The first one is for the signing authorities. The second one is for the acting CAO to be authorized to sign approved contracts. And the third is to remove the signers for the Village of Litton's accounts that were the administrative staff and Ann Yanku.
Thank you very
So
much.
the first one, so the first one is to appoint the signing authorities for the Village of Litton's accounts at Scotiabank. And this is so that there's 2 signatories. So it's either Ron or Terry would be able to sign the checks and one of the council. So there has to be 2 signatories on every transaction.
Is there any discussion?
Do we have someone to make the motion and second it?
Someone like to make a motion?
Counselor Hay, I'll make the motion.
And I'll second.
It's now open for discussion. Hearing no discussion. Oh, Counselor Hay.
Counselor Hay, I'd like my name removed, please.
Okay.
Last time. Thank you.
Oh, you don't want to be a signer?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
The next motion is that Ron Matuzzi, acting CAO, be authorized to sign approved contracts on behalf of the Village of Lytton. I need a mover and a seconder on that one.
I'll make the motion.
Counselor Hay, will second the motion.
Is there any discussion? I have a question, so when these contracts come forward, how will council, if you're gonna sign them, how will council be informed of their?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any kind of signing limit, but certainly I can't see too many situations where there wouldn't be time to come back to council in one form or another. Certainly, given the fact that I'm interim and everything else, I'd be quite cautious about just signing off. So I would include council where I could, and where I couldn't, I would at least inform council that there may be a time restraint. This is the nature, this is the amount. And if council at that point wants a formal motion, then we will do it. I don't believe there's another policy in place, but of course, I've only been here a week, so I'm not sure what your procedure.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just thinking aloud, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I'm happy to present the report in each council meeting in terms of the EAFs that have been, because the starting point is the funding.
Right.
And then the contract signing. So I'm happy to come to council each meeting as we progress through the rebuild to make sure the council is updated.
Thank you.
So once you have the EAF approved, then. yeah,
Then we can sign the
then you can
contracts.
Sign the contracts. You know the money's there before anybody signs anything.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and the final motion is that the following individuals be removed as signing authorities for the Village of Lytton's accounts at the Scotiabank effective October 27th, 2021. Sam Walters, Angela Hollis, and Ann Yankew. I'll need a motion and a seconder on that.
I'll make the motion.
And
And
I'll second.
is there any discussion?
Why are
All
we
in favor?
removing Sam and Angela?
Mr. Haas?
Your worship, and so the idea is that it's not appropriate internal controls to have finance clerks, no insult to them in any way, shape, or form. Under their position, they have custody and access to the records and the assets. So it's something that was done in an emergency basis, but it's certainly not something that we would typically recommend or contemplate. So we're just reversing that and to get us back to appropriate signing authorities. And so the other part of it, when Lori and I were talking, was that once I have authorization with the bank, is to confirm who actually is still signing authorities. There may be some legacy people that we don't even know. And so there may be a motion in subsequent meeting to remove them as well.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we're now on to spending authorities. Mr. Haas?
Thanks, Your Worship. So I've been working and discussing with Shannon Story about recreating the bylaws and policies and so on. So as we know, it's a priority for the village to be doing these. We haven't got there yet. I've done a little bit of research, and spending authorities is typically a few paragraphs of a much larger bylaw. So it's work in progress, And again, as we discussed a moment ago, relative to signing contracts, our informal, if you will, policy and direction from the CAO is that we're not going to sign anything until the funding is secured first. So, so we'll be coming back to council with appropriate bylaw in due course.
So then the next item will be item 8, the permissive tax exemption bylaw. Page 65. Could I get someone to make the motion to adopt the permissive tax exemption bylaw?
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
And that motion passed. So next, we are on to reports from Mayor and Council. Over the last couple of weeks, I met with Team Rubicon and LFN, and we had a goodbye ceremony for Team Rubicon as they provided service to our community for quite some time. I've met with the recovery manager, have provided some assistance to our new CAO when I could. I have a updated building bylaw that I will be posting online soon, very soon. I also had a call from the people at Safer Homes. The guidelines that Safer Homes has put forward have now been adopted by BC Housing, and I believe will reflect on people's ability to get funding from BC Housing. I would like to thank EMBC. They have called all the residents. They have left messages with the residents that they couldn't get a hold of. And I would like, if you had got a call and they've left a message, to get a hold of the village at communications@litton.ca. I'd like to thank EMBC for conducting the housing needs assessment. I've heard nothing but positive reviews from the residents on the job that they've done. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them. That's my report. Councillor Leach.
Okay, I want to start off by saying thank you to Ollie Harrison. Earlier this month, Ollie contacted me and told me about a news report she saw about BC assessments. The report said that BC assessment wants residents affected by the wildfires, which includes Litton, to contact them so they can do adjustments for next year's assessments. When Ollie alerted me, I visited the BC assessment website and saw there's a deadline for this. So I alerted our communications team and they were able to put the information up on the village website. Another example of how important it is to work together as a community. And just a reminder that the deadline is October 31st. So if you haven't contacted them, you still have a couple days. So once again, Ollie and Jasmine for getting information out to our residents. Secondly, I also want to thank EMBC as well. Last week I got a phone call which is called Displaced Province of BC. I answered the call and Shelley from EMBC was contacting me to do a one-on-one resident needs survey. Unlike the very awkward and impersonal online survey I did back in August, Shelley was very sympathetic to what happened to my house and I really appreciated that. She understood what I was going through, people reaching out and caring, something that needs to be done more. She was very informative of the resources available, and at every opportunity, she let me know that I was not alone and there are people ready to help. After a 30-minute conversation, she had a clear understanding of what needs I required. She later emailed me to make sure it was all correct, and she followed up on any questions I had. This is what Litton residents deserve. Thank you for contacting our residents.
Thank you. Councillor Hay.
Councillor Hay, left hand moves to about 9:15 on the 14th of October after the meeting and drove to Lytton where I met with several engineers from Steel River, took them down to the old mill site to view the potential areas for both the interim housing possible camp. Then I had a rush up to attend a meeting or a ceremony I was invited to with Team Rubicon. They completed the sifting within the core area of the village, as well as IR 17 and 18. Representatives from the village and LFN also attended. In my last meeting, I forgot, I passed on thanks to the people that did the volunteer work, and I neglected Lorna Paglo. So Lorna, if you're online tonight, thanks very much for your time. I thought I was going to be in for another rough week or two, but anyway, the rest of the week was very quiet. I just want to let people know that Tim McLeod, who's our reentry coordinator, and Tony from Onsite are doing a great job of carrying out their individual responsibilities, and their hard work will help our people get back into their homes a lot quicker. And lastly, welcome to our new team members, Mr. Matusi and Mr. Haas. Glad to have you aboard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Gray.
The grant that I have been talking about since July has been submitted. That was a very fortunate move that we got Lori Pilon to help through Sal DeMar. She contacted Matthew Wilson, who did an incredible turnaround on this grant application and got it in for us. The ADM has confirmed that it's been received, so we'll see what comes of it. And that's all.
Leadership policy review.
Okay, so we had a meeting this afternoon, so we did a little housekeeping. The first thing is we had 2 engineer reports that were introduced to the committee from Mandel Engineering for the interim housing site and the village office site. The committee is also recommending to rescind 2 standing motions. The first one is 21-154, which was moved by Mayor Fulderman, seconded by Councilor Leach, that council requests an analysis from MNP to determine if the village of Lytton has money available in the budget for temporary fund the interim housing position of up to 30,000 until the province makes a determination on funding. I will need to have someone make a motion on that.
Councillor Hay, I'll make a motion that motion 21-154 be rescinded.
I'll second the motion. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and the second motion was 21-155, which was moved by Mayor Fulderman, seconded by Councillor Hay, that council set up a meeting with ADM Melly and ADM Peterson as soon as possible to discuss funding for the interim housing manager position. So we'll need a motion on that.
Councillor Hay, I'll make a motion that motion 21-155 be rescinded.
I'll second that motion. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
And that is my report.
Thank you. So new business, we are pleased that we have a short-term recovery plan to present. So I will turn the floor over to Mr. Matusi.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before I begin, I'd like to wonder if we could put the PowerPoint on. Whoever's out there that's actually doing that for me.
Yes, for sure. Just 1 second.
Yeah, the Zoom time lag. There we go. Good. Thank you. I'll let you know and you can you move it to the next slide. Thank you, Your Worship. Just a few preliminary comments before we begin. Normally I would stand, but with all the COVID weight I've gained, I'd probably block out half the room. So I'll just sit here if you don't mind. And the plan that we're tabling today is really the first crack at trying to put together a framework that'll help guide recovery. And I know this is extremely important because of the time that has elapsed, that we need to get this information to the minister so that, again, we can start the planning and start releasing the funds that will help us move to the next stage. I know when I met with some residents on Sunday evening, a number of people expressed concern that this plan had really been put together, and it's very much a technical plan at this point in time. The pieces that are coming together are really trying to take information that either existed and a few that we had to build just to put into the plan. So it's by no means the recovery plan. If I could, and if I could quote Churchill, and I figure this is about as any good a time as anyone could quote Churchill. It's not the end. It's not the beginning of the end. It's the end of the beginning, and that's where we are in the process. We're at the end of the beginning, and by tabling this plan, we hope to move forward and get things going, so that in fact we can actually begin the community engagement and the planning. So there's a number of things in this plan that'll speak to community engagement as we move through it. One of the things I'd like to talk about, and a number of councillors and Your Worship has mentioned it, that one of the pieces it was very, very difficult to move forward when we wanted to look at things like housing options, and some of that was really getting a better handle on the needs of our citizens of Lytton. And really, I think in some ways a late call to go back to the citizens, recognizing that there have been a number of people that have contacted them about a number of things in the past and the sensitivity about that, but taking the time to go back and with highly trained people who understand the trauma that people have gone through, and that it is difficult to go back and to talk about these things. And I do have to commend, we weren't quite sure, as I was trying to put this together with the assistance of the Fraser Basin Council, we weren't quite sure how we were going to get that information, how we could go back to the public. And I just want to acknowledge, like everyone else, the team at EMBC who came together and carried out this task. And again, it was not an easy task, and it certainly wasn't something that just anyone could do. And those of you who received the call would recognize that it wasn't something. So again, I do want to high praise for the group, and they're actually still working. So their job is not done. We have some partial information, but it's certainly information that could help with the planning. So although this is a plan, this plan is many ways, again, the end of the beginning and moves us to the next phase. It really is an important milestone that we have that we'll hopefully council can approve, get some more feedback now that it's tabled, and then forward it to the minister so that the provincial government teams can then start and come in and start trying to deal with the needs of the citizens of Lytton. So before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Fraser Basin Council. Fraser Basin Council was not hired initially to do this plan, but once it was the Herculean task to put it together, stepped up and helped the village create the plan that we have today. And so I have to acknowledge their great work to allow the village to put this plan together. Some of the preliminary information that we received from EMBC staff, there's been about 40 completed surveys to date. The good news is the majority of people want to come back. And I think there was always a concern. And so there's about 20% of the people surveyed so far have said either they're not coming back or they're not sure. So even of that 20%, it's broken down. The rest are either already there or are willing to come back. And about 25% said that they'll come back when the services are in place. So the vast majority of people have expressed the desire to come back. Most people are okay. When we asked, would you go to a different type of accommodation, most are saying that they could stay in the accommodation there are. Obviously, that's there's all kinds of requests, including elder care. But the majority of people said that they would stay in their current locations. And another highlight is when we asked about needs, their immediate needs, about 19% said medical, the ability to access medical services. About 19% said food, so some kind of ability to deal with that. And 16% said their focus was on cleanup. That was sort of the most immediate need, is to get started with the cleanup. Interestingly enough, and I think this will certainly help us as we move forward, building out the type of communications. So when we asked how people wanted to be contacted, 32% said by phone, 28% email, 13% website. And, I think a lot of the information to date has been website, but we now know that the majority of people would need to be contacted. And that's probably something to do with the demographics and the fact that they may not be staying at this point in time in a place that has good internet service or reliable. 8% said Facebook, which unfortunately for Facebook people, it's not as high as the other modes. And 19 said other, and other really was a newsletter and things like that, just a group of things. So that's the information. That's as right up to date as 4 o'clock this afternoon from the team at EMBC who's compiling that information. And it really, once again, shows that, this is not the end point. That what I've seen certainly in the last week, the last day, this is a very fluid document. There's a point in which we have to move it on, but tomorrow there'll be other information and other pieces. So let's if you could do the next slide, please. So the recovery plan is broken down into these areas. Safe return, critical infrastructure, essential services, financial and in-kind support, communication, community engagement, economy, emergency and temporary housing, village recovery team and resources. So those are the areas that make up the plan. And within those areas, for those of you who've now had the plan and have read it, there's a fair bit of detail in each of those areas. One of the areas, one of the objectives of the plan, that we wanted to look at were really safe return. Obviously, one of the highest priorities for council is a safe return. There's, as we know on the site today, there are numerous hazards, not only environmental hazards, but also debris. So there's a number of issues that we have to deal with. And we're also trying to deal with getting water, particularly as a priority to the people that are there, and to try to get the do not consume notice lifted. So there was a report on testing, and I think that goes to that. So the return of our residents in a safe manner is paramount. Emergency and temporary housing. The report tries to deal with this. Immediate priority for many residents want to return, and there's a concern about the living allowances at ESS. Has been a concern from day one, and as well as those on insurance and the limited time they have making claims. So as we put this report together, those are things that were certainly in the back of our minds as we were moving through it. Financial in-kind support, there's immediate priority to include things like donations management. Certainly we've heard from the residents where the distribution of the donations are in place. And so that's something that we'll be putting together as a priority as the recovery team builds out. Financial in-kind support. Part of this is also personal planning support services. We've heard from people who really have never had to deal with insurance companies. So there could be some kinds of supports that provide advice for people in that area. Essential services. Be really hard for some people to return to the village if there were some essential services in place: groceries, medical, mental health, RCMP, post office, bank. All those things have to be brought back so that as people move back, the services they need are there. Village recovery team. I've talked a little bit about that tonight, but certainly the plan is to build out the team so that in fact we are dealing with donations management. They are dealing with, I know there's groups dealing with the business community, but are the business community needs be met, and just a whole raft of things that have to happen, and making sure that we have the right kind of supports in place and the right people to guide that so that we can move forward sooner than later. The economy, trying to deal with the economic impacts of the fire, focusing on rebuilding, and trying to get people back on their feet, some kind of financial support to help them do that. Critical infrastructure. I know I'm sure if you've been displaced and your home was burnt, that the top of your mind wouldn't necessarily be how the village rebuilds its infrastructure, but of course that infrastructure is a really important base on which you have to rebuild the village. And so that work is being done. It's being assessed. That assessment is information that will ultimately go back through EMBC to the federal government to pay, to get grants to start paying for the rebuild of that critical infrastructure that's in place. And we may also need it for temporary housing. There's infrastructure that has to be in place for that as well. And dealing with the whole debris removal. Communications and engagement. And certainly, if there's been one area that the residents of, even in my short time here, have raised with me, is the need to be informed and engaged. And I think that certainly, we see that we have to start building those channels. We know tonight that phone calls are one of the ways in which people want to be contacted. A lot more difficult, and I think we've gotten accustomed to putting things on a website, but being able for people to access that is something that we are going to try very hard to put in place as soon as we can to get that infrastructure in place. So I wonder if we just look at the next slide. So this is an example of how each of these sections is laid out. So you have a priority. You have the action that's needed. In this particular case, it's watershed assessment, watershed from a geotechnical hazard, watershed assessment from an environmental review, geotechnical, well, there has to be geotechnical information on the actual lots. And the difference between the insured and uninsured is really who pays for the geotech to be done. And an analysis of that report that was done to really look at what is the hazard, where are the hazards, and how that impacts the debris removal, for example. So you can see that we looked at where the potential funding source is and whether that funding source has been secured. And I think we see from this slide. And one of the most difficult things we had right up until 3 o'clock today was making sure the funding source and some of that information, because some of those things literally were changing hour by hour. So with that up, if we can go back actually to the overall slide, because it'll provide a good view of the framework. What I'm going to do is not go through each and every section, each and every item. I mean, the report's there for the public to absorb. There'll be some time for questions today, but there'll also be 3 days for questions to get back to questions, and we'll go over that. And then that's to get this report to the minister. We'll talk about it a little later, but there will be a workshop to then go through the report in great detail. Again, it's not a fait accompli. It's just at some point we have to get something in. And then we'll have a workshop with the community to go through the full report in detail and maybe be able to touch on a variety of areas. So I'm just going to quickly go through each section. Again, not go point by point, but highlight some of the areas and some of the activities that are in place. When we look at safe return, we've just covered that one. But land survey, one of the things that has to be done is we have to actually survey the lots so that as people are moving debris, we know whose lot the debris is moving from. And so we can keep track of those types of things. It's not a simple matter of taking a backhoe and going in. There has to be an archaeological survey. Litton, as you know, is an integral part of the surrounding Litton First Nation territory. And within the village, there may be sites of extreme sensitivity and importance to Litton First Nation. So that has to be monitored as the debris is removed and as we move through. So once again, it's not only does it have to be surveyed, people may not think that, but there also has to be archaeological assessment as we go through that. Work safe protocols have to be in place. We need qualified professionals. The debris removal, some of the most important things that we can report on is that private property curb to landfill debris removal is being coordinated by the Thompson Nicola Regional District with ENBC assistance, and what we're trying to do is coordinate the debris removal. And at this point in time, we're looking after that, trying to see whether or not the nature of the contract and how that could be coordinated. It's very difficult to work with the number of insurance companies. They may have their own contractors, and it's really not up to the village to determine how they do it, but we could be part of the coordination of that. So there is, in fact, insured and uninsured, and trying to deal with that so it can be all done as one. I think the last thing we want is to have sites within the community that the debris isn't removed. So I think coordinating that's going to be really important. Let's go on to the next area, and I'll again just temporary housing. One of the concerns, obviously, is that ESS was never created to go on and on, and so it was recognized very early on that there needed to be some kind of support. So, for example, immediate and continued support. It's recommended that the immediate and continued provincial funding be provided to residents currently in temporary housing. We're talking about, in this case, the uninsured, based on $1,300 per household per month for, it says 8 months, and that this has been funded, secured by the province. We know that today. Councillor Gray had brought up, whether or not, more could be done. And I think that's something that could be pursued for another day. It's something that could be looked at. But today, what we know is at least that portion provides some stability and security for some of members of the community. Temporary housing, there's been a lot of discussion around temporary housing. And, right now that what we're trying to do is get the numbers and the potential of what that would cost. What we need for that to know how many people want modular temporary housing before we can actually commit. But in the meantime, we are actually pulling together the information. We're trying to get some costs, looking at 3 alternative sites to ensure that if one doesn't work, there's at least a backup plan with some of the costs around that. Other financial and in-kind supports. If you're following, this is page 18. Food and clothing subsidy, really looking at providing aid for those who are unable to secure food, temporary grocery stores or clothing. It's recommended that we look at a partnership to try to see with Litton First Nation and the Litton Community Food Bank and see how we could create something. One of the most difficult aspects of this disaster is that people are spread out. If this happened to one section of one community, my experience in Grand Forks, it was one section of one community. there was still the rest of the community that the supports could be provided. People were displaced to all over the place. And so one of the really difficult things here is how do you service a community that is spread out all over. So there's a number of items here. One of the important things we really need to look at is volunteer coordination and donations management. Very, very quickly, in my experience, communities get overwhelmed by donations. Lots of hard-pouring groups and money and all those things, and they need to be coordinated and they need to be distributed in a fashion that makes some sense. Whether or not, in this particular case, council wants to look at a committee that takes those information with the coordinator and then figures out how best to distribute them. Those are the types of things that really have to be set up very quickly, as well as a volunteer coordinator. I've been on the job a week and I've had a lot of people offer to help. And sometimes we can't find a job for every volunteer on day one, but I do know that over time there'll be lots of need, and that volunteer coordinator will really come in handy so that the people that want to give their time and effort could be put to the highest and best use possible. Canadian Red Cross have been there, they've been at the table to look at case management, and they have a wide variety of supports. And I think, part of the plan is to say, okay, let's match up what groups like the Red Cross have to offer with what are the needs of the community. Again, it's important to understand the needs. So something like an unmet needs committee and setting up a resiliency center would be very, very important. Part of certainly council's priority to get a civic office back in Litton really is about flying the flag and being in Litton and having a focal point. People are spread out, but if they know they can go to Litton and there's a central point of contact and information and maybe services and support, I think that'll go a long way into helping people. Essential services. Essential services are covered on page 21. I think one of the things you'll be struck with, and there's clinical care, a grocery store is an essential service, but there's a lot of actions around mental health, and I think one of the very important aspects of recovery is dealing with the mental health needs of the community. I can honestly say that was an area back in 2003 when I looked at Kelowna. I know we provided that support, but probably not to the extent in which would be helpful. And certainly when asked about places like Slave Lake, one of my recommendations was always was to really be able to put in place ongoing support to help people, not just one day, but that kind of ongoing. And I think what you see here is a whole raft of potential programs that could be available from another number of agencies, including the provincial government and the team of people that they have to deal with this. Pharmacy and ambulance service, RCMP, post office, bank, getting the phones back up and running. I know how important that is to TELUS. I heard today that not only was it important to get the phones in Lytton, but in fact the building in Lytton actually service up and down the valley. So it's of paramount importance to TELUS as well. Local government, once again, I think if you're someone who's been impacted and you're in temporary housing, top of mind isn't whether or not the community's bylaws are in place. And so our focus really has to turn to the community and the people, but somewhere in that time has to be allocated as well to rebuild the documentation, rebuild those bylaws so that the community, as it starts functioning, can start functioning as a local government again. So maybe not top of mind, but certainly important in the whole scheme of things. Local economy. One of the things we've heard, and I know there are a number of people working on, really unfortunate, but a lot of businesses, not just in Lytton, but elsewhere, had to deal with COVID. And dealing with COVID for the last little while was hard enough. Now you add the difficulty of a business in Lytton losing their business, whether they're insured or uninsured. Even if they're insured, they may not be quite as insured as they needed to be. But getting those businesses up and running and trying to really try to deal with those needs of those businesses so that in fact they can get up and running. You know, some of the ideas are, you know, sure, I know that have been put out as recommendations to try to work on is things like 2 to 3 year short-term loans, interest-free loans, and those types of things. Once again, the real difficulty here is there are lots of programs out there, but I think Lytton is a very unique situation. I can only think of Slave Lake, Alberta as the only other community that's had to go through this. And so sometimes it's difficult, and a lot of these programs have to be customized to try to make them fit. And so that unfortunately isn't something that can happen overnight. Sometimes those things have to be put in place. Business development, again, so not only that direct support to help the businesses back, but also information and also advice and some of those other things. And finally, business promotion for those that can get up and running. I know it was really important in Kelowna to let people know after night on the media, people watching Kelowna, because that fire lasted a month, that we have to tell people to look, we're open for business. You know, you can come back. There's something here. We welcome people. So I think that promotion side is going to be very, very important as well. Critical infrastructure, I don't want to dwell on too much because it's only an interest to the engineers out there. And but other than to say it's very, very important and it's very, very costly. And so I'll have to trust the engineers that are out there. Right now, water again is the most important priority. I know water in general, water in particular, and getting the water tested so that you know, I think people forget, not in Lytton, but people out there forget that in fact there are a number of homes in Lytton that have everything but clean water, and if we can get clean water to those residents, that's 30 houses, 32 houses that we don't have to worry about as much, so we can now focus on some of those other areas. So that is a priority. Finally, communications and engagement. And that kind of starts on page, very sticky here, page 33. And, you know, really trying to lay out this process and to try to get this plan and move it through, recognizing that really, if you see this plan, it's very much a framework. What are the things we have to look at? Do we have some ideas around it? Is there some funding? Is there some possibility of funding? That's what this is trying to do. And I think there really needs to be, and there will be, more engagement with the citizens. One of the things that we're recommending is an advisory committee, so that in fact citizens are at the table as we go through this plan, as we build the next plan, as we do that, that it's something that's happening with the citizens at the table, providing that advice. I mean, technical advice is very important, but you also need the advice of the people who live in the community and what they feel is important to help guide council as they make some very difficult decisions and have to balance a lot of different things. So, you know, this is the first step, but there will be a longer term, this is the short term, longer term community plan. And that plan, you know, hopefully can also be done in conjunction with Lytton First Nations and the neighbors that are an integral part, who are a service area to a number of communities around Lytton. And I think it's really important that everyone is also being part of the broader plan. And we see so many of these things, whether it's even the sharing of water and the water services and how integrated that alone is with our neighbors. Yes, Lori?
Sorry, I saw a chat was there and I was just trying to get into it. I didn't mean to raise my hand. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. We saw you raise your hand though, that's good. So again, the plan goes through a number of short-term actions, talks about some next steps in terms of communications. I think, we have to rethink some of the ways in which we transmit information to the citizens of Lytton, and make a determined effort to have the citizens be a part of the planning of it. So next slides, you can skip the next one and go to the next one. There we go. So moving together, I think, these are some of the timelines that we'll be dealing with. So this plan will be tabled tonight with council. Hopefully council will support the plan and recommend that we move it forward. Recognizing that there was limited time, because it was really important for us to get this plan underway so we could again move to the next stage. We're going to ask some feedback. I know today we've actually pushed the citizens' questions to after the presentation, so we can capture some questions there, but also have any questions people could ask up until noon on Friday. That would be questions about the plan. Do we miss anything? Are there anything that we have to look at? And then the updated plan would be forwarded to Minister Farnsworth at 5 o'clock on Friday, October 29th. We would hope today council has a motion for the formulation of an advisory committee that we could take, in some ways, one of the first recommendations of the plan and get it off the ground. On November 8th, we'd like to organize a forum to go through the plan and some of the pieces of it in more detail. And we'll be able at that time to present the resident survey, because we should have that work now complete, and that will inform the plan and it may alter some assumptions in the plan. A discussion of the short-term recovery plan, question and answer period, and then really set the stage for the longer-term planning process, which again I think will be far more inclusive, far more community engagement, and that'll happen later in the fall. Next slide. There is one. Maybe the last one. No. Yes, one more slide, please. Oh, there we go. I looked down and it came up. So, Your Worship, really, this is one of the recommendations, and council has this information as well, but we're sharing it with the public. Really to create an advisory planning committee to advise on the recovery plan and advise the mayor and council, hear from residents, and invited experts and stakeholders. So some of the questions that have, maybe they in fact bring in some of the experts to talk about things like building bylaws come to mind, and provide recommendations to council. The composition, recommend that the chairman be appointed. We ask the community to submit their interest, and then a recommendation back to council on who the members of the committee would be, and set up regular meetings. So if you're interested in participating, unfortunately, I can't see. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and because the bottom's cut off, and suggest that with all, hopefully she'll be okay with this. But if you could send it to Lytton Communications for now, and I'll ask Jasmine to once again do me a favor and collect those information so she could pass it on to Lori as the corporate officer, and then to the person who's going to be chairing the committee. So we have a central place to do it. If that is difficult, then I would suggest that we find a way, and we'll sort of put it forward, or to I almost hesitant to say call the village office, because I'm waiting for at least one person to say, do I have a number? And if I don't have a number, we'll get a number. That'd be a way to do it too.
I think it's communication.
She posted it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's in the chat. Good. Okay, thank you very much. Your worship, with that, I would like to table the short-term recovery plan for council's consideration. And I'd be happy to answer any questions of council, and then you can move to the next part of the meeting.
I'd like to take this opportunity as mayor to create a select standing committee called the Residents Advisory Committee with Mr. Leach as the chairman. And then we will move to discussion. Oh, yes. Can I get a motion to adopt the immediate needs recovery plan as presented?
Councillor Hay, I move to adopt the Village of Lytton immediate needs for recovery plan as presented.
And I will second that.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
So then we're moving on to recommendations from the recovery plan. Pardon? Oh, yes, well, that's next, sorry.
Yeah, your worship, not necessarily the recommendations, just to move the recovery plan be forwarded to the minister.
Okay. So can I get a motion to forward the recovery plan to the minister?
I will make that motion.
And only one stipulation, as may be amended based on feedback we receive.
Councillor Hay, second the motion.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So now we'll open this up to the public.
Thank you. Members of the public are now invited to comment on matters related to the agenda for up to 2 minutes. As Ron mentioned today, we also encourage you to use this time to provide your thoughts or questions on the draft short-term recovery plan. If you would like to speak today, please use the raise hand function on Zoom. You can find that by clicking reactions at the bottom of your screen and then clicking raise hand. When it's your turn, I'll read your name and we will ask you to unmute yourself. You'll get a pop-up on your screen asking you to unmute. You will have up to 2 minutes to speak. I will give you a 30-second warning verbally and in the chat. And at the end of the 2 minutes, your microphone will be automatically disabled. Our first speaker today will be Judith Urquhart. I will ask you to unmute now.
Mayor and Council, I am Judith Urquhart, former resident of 87 Main Street, Litton. At the October 13th Village Council meeting, a motion was carried to apply to the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund for up to $200 million. The reason stated for this grant was to protect fires by rebuilding the community using fire-resistant materials and drought-tolerant vegetation, with the project to include a geothermal district energy system village grid, photovoltaic sidewalk and parking lot panels to reduce island heat absorption and reuse the power generated for municipal, business, and residential needs, supported green energy technologies in homes and buildings, net zero and net zero ready homes for businesses, and to protect residents against rising energy costs. I ask you, Mayor and Council, how a geothermal district energy system, photovoltaic sidewalks and parking lots and net zero buildings will mitigate a future wildfire. The building bylaws you have introduced are all about geothermal district energy system, photovoltaic sidewalks and parking lots, and they are all centered in the downtown core. Meanwhile, no mention whatsoever is being made of retrofitting buildings above the CP tracks to a higher standard of fire resistance. Given that the area of Lytton above the tracks had 2 close calls in this year alone with the Lytton Creek fire narrowly missing the upper village, and the late return of the George Road
You have 30 seconds.
under Lytton. Shouldn't there be some acknowledgement that the rest of the village remains under threat of burning to the ground as well? I suggest to you, Mayor and Council, that very little of your energy has been on fire protection and more of your focus has been on achieving a net zero standard, and then only for the downtown core to create a showplace for reasons you are not sharing with us.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker today will be Edith Loring. Edith, I'll ask you to unmute now.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Edith Loring Kohunga, and I'm a former resident of 537 Fraser Street. I want to first of all start off by thanking Ron Matusi for attending our residents meeting on Sunday evening. He provided a lot of answers to many of the questions that we've had for the last 3 to 4 months. And we found it very informative and gave us a lot of hope. In regards to the short-term recovery plan, from what I understand at the last council meeting, that was a plan that was being put together by Fraser Basin. It now seems to not be the plan by Fraser Basin. So I wonder about a couple of questions. What is the timeline for this short-term recovery plan? What is in the report, it talks about emergency versus temporary housing. And moving past November 30th, that if ESS is not providing further support past November 30th, the document talks about or other means. I'm not sure what that other means would be. In the report, it also talks about how many of the businesses were interviewed. However, it doesn't say anything about any residents that were interviewed.
You have 30 seconds.
And yet the document also says the importance of having residents be part of it. I do want to thank Ron for the recommendation of the advisory committee. I wonder about how the selection process will be. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker today will be Denise O'Connor. Denise, I will ask you to unmute now.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Denise O'Connor from 522 Fraser Street. I spent about an hour reading through the recovery plan last night, and I was impressed with its comprehensiveness. It looks to me like there are still, though, many questions about where funding will come from for a number of the items. One item in particular on page 27 and 28 caught my attention, and it's something I've actually been concerned about since very early on. On page 27, the recommendation states, redeveloping a building bylaw is an essential item that must be addressed in the immediate term to allow for rebuilding and construction to eventually begin. The village can develop a new building bylaw based on the existing building code in BC. On page 28, it reads, to ensure residents are able to make informed decisions regarding insurance claims and buyouts, the village will need to redevelop a building bylaw immediately. All rebuilding will need to be in compliance with the BC Building Code requirements. It is important for the village to explore the implications of a new or enhanced building code and what it will mean for residents. When the mayor gave his report just earlier this evening, he said there will be a new bylaw posted soon. I'm making an assumption here, but I assume that means bylaw 750, the net zero living community bylaw, will be thrown out the window.
You have 30 seconds.
And replaced with one that everyone understands. The council understands, the residents, everybody understands. I am not opposed to lowering emissions or building more energy efficient or building fire safe, but I was opposed to that ridiculous 60+ page bylaw 750 and the process in which it was introduced. I'm hopeful that a new bylaw that you're going to be showing us takes the report's recommendations and replaces 750. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker today will be Sheila Mcguire. Sheila, I will ask you to unmute now.
Hi, it's Sheila Mcguire, and I just got a couple things to say. I'm the president of the Legion, and I would like to see the Legion be rebuilding immediately, as fast as we can. But I'd also wonder why in this short-term plan that's been put in place, why we're talking about hiring a grant writer when the village of Litton has a grant writer. Tanya Collins has been the grant writer for, I don't know, a number of years. I'd say 8, 9. So why would we be hiring a new one? I think it would be important to tell us why. I also think that it would be important to tell us why we are being held up by a bylaw that seems to me, if we're going to go net zero, is holding us up instead of just being the BC building code. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker today will be Charles or Noni McCann. I will ask you to unmute now. Are you able to unmute? I'll resend the request.
Mute. There, finally, something funny happened. I'm sorry.
No worries.
There we go. Okay. Hi, it's Noni, and it's nice to see you all. I have 4 pluses and then a question for you. So going through the plan and looking at different things, I'm encouraged to see that it provides a record of many of the concerns that has been sent in by residents since July. I'm encouraged to see that it identifies concerns regarding communication. And then who knows, maybe there will even be a phone number someday in the near future. That it identifies in a summary diagram urgent objectives and immediate priorities. I'm encouraged that the organization and the inclusion of local residents in groups assigned planning steps going forward is identified, and that it will be critical to provide a positive relationship in the days ahead. My concern is that many have made offers of help and support over the past 4 months. And sadly, the lack of response has led to an erosion of trust in future dealings and with you. I'm sorry to say, it's really hard to continue to be positive and to be hopeful and to engage in the process with you. And I'm glad that you understand that. I hope you really do, because I'm willing to give it a try. And I think a lot of other people are willing to give it a try.
You have 30
And
seconds.
I look forward, thank you. I look forward to working with you in your community input sessions, even though I'm not a resident who lost a home. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. The last speaker today will be Jennifer Thoughts. I will ask you to unmute.
Hi there, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Jennifer Thoss, property owner in Lytton. I want to start off by saying thank you for everything that's progressed in the last few weeks, especially this draft plan that's come out, and I understand the document's organic. So I'll put a few comments out there just on the draft plan to start. One is, despite having correspondence with Fraser Basin Council around garbage collection, I mean, it's a minor point, but it shows still that we have work to be done on consultation. There's never been garbage collection in Lytton. We have a very limited number of residents, and it would be great if that could be taken out of the equation as a roadblock to re-entering the village, along with the post office, which I believe there's an announcement coming out very soon. There will be one relocated. and the bank, which I believe is already there. There are people in the area already, so it would be nice if we could expedite the return of residents and focus on that and not these bylaws. As Noni and a few other speakers have alluded to, and is very clear in the delegation, and from the delegation we presented on October 13th, and from my discussions with residents, I haven't actually spoke with anyone that supports bylaw 750. So I'm happy to see that hopefully that will be tabled. I'm still waiting for the October 13th delegation to be on the record. 59 residents responded and supported that delegation and the recommendations within that delegation.
You have 30 seconds.
And it's, I have been told by Lori, I think it's Weedman, thank you, Lori, that it will be put up on the website earlier today, but I haven't seen that yet. So I would like that to be on the record. I have concerns around the EMBC call out. I did receive a call today, which was fantastic. We're moving in the right direction. Very happy about that there is some in-depth consultation happening. These people were doing a great job. I have concerns over the people they're calling and the list they're using. I wonder where that's coming from. I haven't been able to get an answer on that from anyone, but I know I personally gave them 3 numbers of residents they did not have. There's people that did not have a cell phone to begin with. There's people that obviously are technologically challenged and don't have access to the internet. And I know of at least, like I say, 3 residents that I gave phone numbers to EMBC for that were not on their radar. So if there's 3 that I have.
Minutes.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And that concludes the public comment portion of this evening. Thank you.
Your worship, I just
Yes.
not respond to any particular one, but you know, just to you know, once again clarify, and the role of the Fraser Basin is really to help me. As you could imagine, this document has many components, and you know, considering that the bulk of this document was put together in a week, there are going to be some things like garbage collection or whatever that was missed, and obviously we'll, you know, most of those things could be cleared up. I'm not sure, you know, that something like that's going to be noticed by the minister, but you know, those things can be in fact cleaned up. You know, in terms of, and so again, their role was supporting me. They were never hired to do this plan. They were hired to support me as we tried to pull this together. And I appreciate their expertise and their team that could support me in trying to do this. I think you can see that, in fact, the focus is on the residents. One of the things, if it isn't clear, that will be clear, certainly as our new recovery person comes in, there's a real desire to engage local residents. And so, in fact, if there is a grant writer in town, this implies we need one that doesn't say who they are. And if they're there, then maybe that's the grant writer. So as a general rule, locals will be priority in the recovery. And so I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
So we're on to our calendar of events. Any discussion on
Excuse me,
that?
Your Worship. Your Worship, I think I may have had the date of acting CAO's citizens meeting. I think it might have been last Sunday, not this coming Sunday. I just had that incorrect, I think, on the agenda.
She's got it as October 31st.
October 31st and
21st.
21st.
Whatever last Sunday was.
Yeah.
Last
24th, okay. So, okay, so we don't have, are there any questions on that? Seeing that there's none, could I get a motion to move into a closed meeting under section 90 of the community charter, 90-1E and 1G?
Councillor Hay, I make a motion that we move to in-camera meeting now.
So
Is there a seconder?
I'll second, Robert seconds, all in favor?
Aye.
Point of order, but Lori, I didn't have my agenda in front of me, so if you can put the appropriate community charter item in, it'd be much appreciated.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
As we move to in camera, I'll ask residents on the line to leave the session by just clicking the red button at the bottom. If you don't know how to do that, I will assist you. Thanks.
So we still have a couple of, there's one going.
The garbage collection, Clyde Torrey made a living doing it in my house all the time, charged $35. He made a living at it, so it was garbage pickup.
Wasn't the village, but it was private.
Yeah.
The village didn't pick it up, but there's a person that did.
Well, that's good to know.
And I'm presuming they're going to.
That's how we know the mob runs New York garbage.
Yeah, couldn't.
All right, it's just Counselor Gray, Lori, and ourselves in the room now.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to call the meeting to order. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda for the October 27th closed council meeting?
I'll make the motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.